Hello and welcome to episode 35 of Knitter Matters. Thank you so much for tuning in today, whether you're watching it live or the replay afterwards. Really welcome, it's lovely to have you with us. I'm Cheryl Lampard, I'm an image consultant with my company Style Matters International, and throughout my life my two passions have been sewing and knitting. And knitting in particular, I find it's my therapy. I find it so relaxing and I do it every day. I had the great pleasure in the UK of owning a yarn store in Brighton, England, and one of the great joys of owning a yarn store is that you get to be able to teach people how to knit with all these gorgeous yarns. Now it's my pleasure now to be able to teach you how to knit using this platform of Facebook Live. So we're going to get going. I'm going to ask the camera to turn to the worktop. I'm going to take my seat and we'll get started on today's subject, which is all about button bands. Now, I should say, do feel free to put any comments or questions in the thread below as we go along. I can't see you while I'm doing the Facebook Live, but I will get back to you as soon as possible afterwards. If I see your name pop up as you join us, then I'll give you a shout out. But just bear in mind, I can't really see the questions as we go along. Now, last week, we finished the Carefree Cardi pattern by Mary Maxim. This garment didn't have worked on or stitched on front bands. It didn't have a buttonhole band because it didn't have buttons. It's meant to be relaxed and easy, and you're almost like a dressing gown. You kind of snuggle it around you. But many garments do have button bands, and they do serve a purpose. Obviously, they're going to support buttons and buttonholes, so they need to be treated slightly differently. Now, we talked in episode 25, we looked at various edgings. This was an I-cord edging we did on some ribbing. That could make a nice edging for a garment. We did picot edges for hemlines and a sort of a stitched and knitted hem. Now these are all very well, and a border and a band does pretty much the same thing. It flattens and covers raw edges, but a band for a button band is usually wider than an edging, and more importantly, it's used to stabilize certain areas. This is great for a hemline, but it's a bit too stretchy for a button band, as to would be this one. This one is a nice way to finish off an edge, and you could indeed put buttonholes in there and put buttons on. So you could use something like an I-cord to do that. But I'm going to show you some of the traditional ways. Oh, hello, Maureen. I see you've just joined us. Thanks so much for coming in. Thank you. So I'm going to show you a couple of ways. I'm going to show you two ways of doing button bands and then a very special one. And you can, as we did, as in the Carefree Cardi, you can work a front band, a button band, in with the garment as you're making it. But you won't get a very firm edge because what you generally need to do is use a smaller needle. This one, for example, I just did a little sample in stockinette stitch, and I've put this band on afterwards. I'm going to show you how to do this because we have to pick up stitches along here. And I'm only going to work on the button side of the band. We've done buttonholes before. We did buttonholes in episodes 21 and again in episode 26. So you can always go back and watch those again. Hello, Sharon. Nice of you to join us. Thank you so much. So my samples are in rib. That's a traditional way of doing bands, but you don't have to. You can do other stitch patterns, but you do need to consider what the band has to do. In this border that we did for our sample Afghan, I used a seed stitch border. And seed stitch does indeed, if this were up the side of a cardigan or the front of a cardigan, seed stitch doesn't do a very nice job. It gives you a nice, I've got somebody else's teeth in today. It gives you a nice firm edge, but there's not a lot of stretch. So yes, you'll get a firmer edge, but you won't get much stretch. So think about how that would work on your garment. That's not to say you can't do it. and it does give a lovely edge, but you've got to think about what the purpose is. And by the very nature of it being a button band, you're going to have, you want something that's got some give. You want something that's got some stretch and will spring back, because it's all very well on the button side. Yes, you can put backing buttons on, and you can support your band in a different way if you wish, but you're going to have buttonholes on the other side, and those have got to be able to spring back, otherwise you're going to get a horrid gaping hole. So let me show you this one first, and I'll show you how to pick up the stitches. I'm just going to swivel in my chair a bit. I'm going to use the other side of my piece just to show you. I'm going to use a smaller needle. You need to generally use a smaller needle for button bands because you want a firmer tension. Can you see me okay here? Yeah, you want a firmer tension. So I've gone down a couple of needle sizes. You may have to play about with that. Your pattern will tell you generally what size needle they've used, but if you've changed what you're doing or you're making your design up, then you do need to play about, and that's all part of your swatching at the very outset or when you come to do the bands. So when it comes to picking up, oh hi Mary Jane, thank you for joining us, thanks so much. I'm going to pick up from the bottom edge and go upwards. I'm going to use a different colour yarn so you can see what I'm doing. So what I'm doing is I'm not going to go on here. I'm going to take a full stitch in. You get a much cleaner line like that. And again, because I did an edge stitch for my side seam, for my front band seam, if you will, I've got a nice edge that I can use there. I don't want to pick up on loops and things like that because it'll leave me holes and it won't look at all nice. So I'm just going to go in here, and I'm not worrying about knots or anything at the end. I can work those in afterwards. So I'm literally, you can do this with a crochet hook as well. I'm going to go in the kind of gaps, if you will, between my rows. Now, so I'm picking up the two legs, if you will, of that edge stitch. Now I made a note that on this sample I picked up 38 stitches. I'm not going to go along the whole thing because we'll be here far too long otherwise. Now if you think sometimes you have to adjust picking up one stitch for every gap, if you will, because it can sometimes be too much. So I'm just going to miss one here and go into the next one. Remember, I want stretch. I want some sort of tension on my band. So I don't want it to be loose and fluted. And certainly if you're doing something like seed stitch, you may need to like do 3 and then miss one. Something like that. It's something you just have to play about with. Again, I'm gonna go in there, then I'm going to miss one. So I hope, no, I'm actually going to miss that one and go there. So I would go up the whole of my front like this, picking up, and again, I'm going to work my needle in. You can use a crochet hook, as I said, but there's another advantage in using if I could just see what I'm doing there, a needle that's a few sizes smaller, is that it's much easier to pick up the stitches. So yeah, I'll do another couple of stitches, then I'll turn around and start knitting it. There we go. And sometimes you have to stop and have a look and test it out, and then maybe pick a bit, and maybe I could have picked up another one there. You know, it's one of those things that you have to just play about with, really. What you don't want is something that's really loose and kind of fluted. Right, so now I've picked up a number of stitches along the front. I picked up on that edge stitch. So on the back, I'm going to have a bit of an edge. That's fine. I'm fine with that. But you can see there, those stitches have been picked up. Then really all I'm going to do now, obviously this would be at the end of my piece. So I'm just going to stop it in the middle. So I'm going to do my ribbing. And I always have a look after that first row and see if I think that looks right, if I think I need to pull it out and start again, add more stitches. You know, the pattern will tell you often how many to pick up, but not always, and even then that varies because every knitter is slightly different. Tension can be different. Well, tension is different on every knitter. So that's my first row, and obviously I'd keep going up, and that I think that's actually evening out quite nicely. So that's exactly what I did on this side, and I've got more rows than I had stitches to pick up, but that works nicely. I've got a nice stretchy band, but it lays flat. That's the other thing. You don't want it pulling in. You want it to lay nice and flat, okay? And on this side, that's how it looks there. You will get a ridge. You can't help but have that. But you do get a really nice clean edge by going into that first line of stitching. It doesn't look as pretty on this side because we're using a different colour, but that's the way I did it. Okay, so that's that option. Another option, let's get that out of the way, is this button band, which is knitted separately and then stitched on. And all this is a button band of ribbing. You stitch it on afterwards using our mattress stitch. We did mattress stitch in episode 27. I've shown you how to do that several times, so I'm not going to stitch this one on, but it's the same principle. You're going to take that edge stitch, you're going to use that edge stitch as your seam, and on the band, I'll show you here, I worked one here for a few rows just to show you. So again, if your pattern doesn't say how many I'm getting caught up with the microphone here. If the pattern doesn't say how many stitches, decide how wide you want it. The wider it gets, the more kind of flappy it gets, the more unstable it gets. So an inch is usually a good amount. Depends what you're doing with it. Depends on the weight of the yarn. Some people like very small button bands. They like them, you know, half that size. You can do that. Again, it's going to also, the size of your button is going to dictate that too. You don't want a button that takes over the whole button band. It's got to be in keeping with your button band. But for this purpose, I cast on here, what did I do? I cast on 9 stitches. You could do 8, you could do 7, you could do more. And all this is simple rib. I suggest if you're just doing simple rib, you tug on the yarn on the first stitch of every row. That helps you get a really nice, neat edge. This is simple knit 1, purl 1 rib. You could certainly knit into the back of the stitches if you wish to. I was playing about with this one and I decided I would knit into the back of the last stitch on that row to see if I liked it. And actually I do. On this side it gives me a nice firm edge, so I do like that. Let me just come back on this row, and again I'm starting with a purl stitch here, so I'm going to tug that really tight. I hate sort of loopy edges. I don't like loopy edge stitches, and it can't be helped sometimes. As you knit, you're moving the yarn across the row, so there's always, when you get to the end of the row, there's a sort of relaxation of tension, if you will. So the yarn, that's why you get these loops sometimes, because the yarn's got to go somewhere. You're pushing it along. But you can decide what you like. I do suggest that whatever cast-on method you use for your main garment, you stick to the same one for your edge, for your button band. But you can decide which edge you like before you start. But I did a cable cast on there, so I'm doing a cable cast on there. And then you can see how, you see that knitting into the back of that last stitch gives you a really nice firm edge there. So that would really be quite nice as an open, the edge that's the public edge, as it were. and then that would be your stitched on knit. But you can play with that. You could even do a twisted rib, which what I did here is actually just knit into the back of all the knit stitches and purled into the back of all the purl stitches. You still got some, you certainly got a nice stable band there, and you just get some ridgy interest, if you will. So you could certainly do something like that, but do play about first. So those are our sort of standard button bands that you'll see on a lot of different garments. Now I want to show you something really a bit special, if I can get rid of some of this. So this is a button band. This is a bit different. It's done with a technique called double knitting. Now in the UK, double knitting refers to the weight of a specific yarn. It's similar to US worsted yarn, so it's a worsted weight. But if anyone does know what double knitting, the technique is called in the UK, please tell me, because it's not a technique that I actually did until I came here, you know, over a decade ago. So I know that's a confusing thing. We talk about double knitting weight yarn in the UK, but double knitting technique, I'd love to know what it's called in the UK if anybody knows. Anyway, double knitting creates a really nice two-sided fabric. It creates a double-sided fabric on one set of needles at the same time. I'll say that again. It creates a double-sided fabric on one set of needles at the same time. And if you look here at my button band here, I can actually pull that apart. It's a kind of a tube. How cool is that? So often you'll see double knitting. I will show you this little sample. You'll often see double knitting done in more than one colour, usually two colours. This is the first sample of double knitting that I ever did. This was my first attempt. It's all over the place, and the stitch intention isn't great, but I was so proud of this attempt when I did it. It does take some practice, and as you can see here, I can pull this bit apart, and that bit apart, but because you're reversing the stitches on different rows, still on the same set of needles, it joins itself at various points. It's not a technique that is a sort of knit with a glass of wine technique, although I appreciate this sample looks like I might have knitted with several glasses of wine, but I've kept it all this time because I'm just so pleased with it. But it's a really interesting technique, and you get a really nice squishy fabric, which can be really perfect on a button band. So I'm going to show you how this works, because we're not going to do a two-colour technique. That does take a little bit more practice. But I'm going to show you the one-colour technique. And to start off with, I'm going to show you really the structure of it, how it works. So what I've done here, I've cast on with a long tail cast on. You can easily do a cable cast on as well. You need to work with an even number of stitches. If you think double knitting, think double stitches. So you're working in pairs of stitches really at the same time. So let me show you how we get started. So this is 10 stitches I've cast on here. Yes, it's 10 stitches. So I'm going to show you this technique first, then I'm going to show you how we do the buttonholes, because yes, you can do a buttonhole on a double-sided fabric at the same time. How cool is that? So what we're going to do, we knit one, we bring the yarn forward, we slip that with the yarn in front, then we take that to the back, then we knit, bring the yarn forward, slip the purl stitch with the yarn in front, bring the yarn back, knit, bring the yarn forward, slip purlwise but with the yarn in front, yarn back, knit one. I do that to the end of the row, and my last stitch is a purl. That's all I do. I just keep repeating those rows. And I'm going to do that because something magical starts to happen. Oh, I need to get that out of the way. Camera says that's annoying. Okay, so I knit my first stitch, purl, with the yarn in front, take the yarn to the back. I'm not purling the stitch, I'm slipping it, but I am knitting the knit stitch. Bring the yarn forward, slip the purl stitch with the yarn in front, take the yarn back, knit, bring the yarn forward, slip, yarn backwards, knit. Okay, and something magical will start to happen in a minute. Last stitch is purl, and this is all I'm doing on every single row. I'll do a few more rows and then you'll really start to see, because it's important to understand the structure of double knitting to see how it works. So I'm just speeding up a bit now. If you do happen to purl it in error, it's not the end of the world, but you won't get the sort of tube effect, and you'll get an indentation on the other side of the knitting. So when you're doing the two colour, you're knitting with you're bringing the two colours forward and back at the same time, and you're kind of reversing the colour on the chart. It's always going to be with a chart, or it should be. So it is it's a good mind teaser. Anyway, do another couple of rows and then you'll see. Now you start now to have seen that although I've got 10 stitches, it's pulling in. I'm still slipping that purl stitch. Okay, there's probably enough stitches now for you to see. I'll do one more row, because then I'm going to do something that knitters hate to do, is take the stitches off the needle. Because I want to, oh look, let's see, I'm talking at the same time, I nearly purled that. Don't do that. So you can see how this fabric starts to make itself. I hope I didn't purl that, did I? Oh gosh, no I didn't. It's very easy to sort of lapse into it. Okay, it's enough to show you. So I'm going to take this off the needles now. Now look, you're creating a tube. It's amazing technique. It's almost like a little knitting machine. It's almost like a little I-cord, but you're not making an I-cord. But all we've done is knit and slip that purl with the yarn in front. You must keep the yarn. If you don't pull the yarn forward and then take it back, you don't get this open sort of tube. So obviously if I did 6 inches of that, I'd have a tube that's 6 inches long. So that's exactly what I've got here. This is my tube. Okay, and it's a lovely, lovely edge. Now you ask, that's all very well for the button band, Cheryl, and yes, you sew it on afterwards with your mattress stitch. That's exactly what I did there. You've got a slightly thicker edge to manage, but it's very manageable. Now you're going to ask me, how on earth do we do a buttonhole on one pair of needles with 2 sides to the fabric? Well, I'm going to show you. So I did a wider band here. This has got 14 stitches on it. These are my buttonholes. That would be the wrong side, but the buttonhole goes through both sides. So here, you could see, I can open that out, but of course where my buttonholes are, I can't. But this is such a nice buttonhole band. You've got stability there. You've got a really nice edge that you don't have to worry about, and you've got holes in one go. I'm going to show you how to do this buttonhole technique. I am going to bring in my instructions for it. Now, this is not my invention for the buttonhole. It's I was taught this by Sarah Solomon at one of the Vogue knitting lives in New York. She is a knitting instructor, and she is a designer, and she came up with this amazing technique. So I'll show you how to do it, but you'll need to go to Sarah's blog for the written instructions. I'll post a link to her site afterwards so you can visit her blog for them. Now there's several steps to this, and I'm going to bring that forward so I can show you what I'm doing, but we'll follow along. So all I did here was I cast on, I used a long tail, or you can use a cable cast on. I cast on 14 stitches here. So my first step, this is going to be my right side row. So I'm going to knit one, I'm going to slip purlwise exactly as we just did with the yarn in front I'm going to knit one, then I'm going to slip the purl stitch, take that stitch back and knit one stitch. So I've got 5 stitches on my right hand needle. Now I'm going to do something that Sarah calls an RLI, right lifted increase, into the bump of the next purl stitch. So what that means, you have this bump here of this next purl stitch, okay? I'm going to lift that. I'm not taking this stitch off the needle. Let me show you. I've got up to where I start my buttonhole. It's this purl bump, if you will. I'm going to lift that and then I'm going to knit that stitch. I don't take that off the needle. Sorry, I should have knitted it into the back. I beg your pardon. Well, that's kind of what I did actually. So it's the purl bump there and I'm going to just knit into the back of that stitch. So I've now got 6 stitches on my right hand needle. Now what I do is use that purl stitch that I didn't take off the needle and I knit that together with the next knit stitch. So I knit 2 together. Now I'm going to pass that raised lifted increase, if you will, over that knit 2 together. Okay, so it's a 1 stitch bind off there and I have 7 stitches remaining on my left needle. Don't worry about remembering this. So now I'm going to knit 2 together. I just want to show you how it's done. Then I pass that over my needle again. It's another bind off. So I've got 5 stitches left on my left needle. I'm now going to slip 1 stitch purl yarns with the yarn in the back. So I'm going to slip that next stitch, which is a purl one. My yarn is at the back and I pass that 2nd stitch, this one, on the right needle over that 1st stitch. So I've bound off another stitch. I'm going to transfer this stitch back to my left hand needle. Okay, I have 5 stitches now on my left hand needle. Now I'm going to cast on 5 stitches onto this needle using the cable cast on that we've done before. But what that means is you go in between those 2, pull that through. I've just got to pay attention to how many I'm casting on. I've got to do 5. That was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. I should now have 15 stitches in total on both my needles. I've got 5 there. I've got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Good, I've got the right number of stitches. So now I transfer the 1st stitch on my right needle to the left needle. Okay, I know. This is like, oh, how are we doing this? I'm passing that last cast on stitch over it. This kind of closes the buttonhole. Then I'm returning that stitch to my right needle. I'm not knitting that again because that was already knit previously. Now all I'm going to do is tighten up that working yarn. So I'm going to give that a little pull there. Then I bring my yarn forward. I slip that purlwise with my yarn in front. Knit 1. So I'm knitting the cable cast on stitches that I've just done. Bring that forward, slip that one purlwise. Remember, we're not purling that now. Knit that. And then carry on knitting for the rest of my row in the way that we did before. And you'll be going, oh, that's so difficult. It's really not. You just have to follow the steps. Now I will continue to knit in the way that we did before. Knit, purlwise, slip that purlwise, yarn backwards, knit, yarn forward, slip purlwise, yarn backward, knit, forward, slip, round, knit, forward, slip, back round. It's not as complicated. It is a bit at first because there's several steps, but we did a similar buttonhole, I think in episode 26, where we sort of moved stitches from one needle to another and so on. So that is your buttonhole in a two-sided fabric using 2 needles. How cool is that? And of course you'll knit more up there and it'll start looking better, and look even better when you block it. So I know it's a lot, but don't worry, when you start doing it, it's much easier than you think. You just have to pay attention to the various steps, which Sarah actually writes out very well for you. Okay, so I'm going to ask the camera to, oh, one thing I should have done, sorry, to bind off in double knitting, just let me show you this. Sorry, I should show you this. To bind off in double knitting, what we would do, knit 1, because you're working in pairs, remember, knit 1, knit 2 together. Again, there's other ways to do this, but I find it easiest. Knit 2 together, pass that over. Knit 2 together, pass that one over that's left on the right hand needle, knit 2 together. You need to bind them off in pairs, otherwise you're going to get a very flappy frilly edge. You've knitted in pairs, you're binding off in pairs. Okay, that's all you do. That's probably the easiest part. You're just binding off 2 until you get to the last one, and then you would bind that off. Okay, that's a double knitting button band. Now I'll ask the camera to go back. Ha! I know that was a lot, but I just want to show you that, I just want to use that to explain to you there's more than one button band technique. Start with the easy ones, then do try that double knitting technique. It's amazing. I'm almost obsessed with it. I just love the feel of it as I'm knitting it. It's that nice sort of spongy texture. Anyway, as always, if you have any questions or comments, put them in the thread below during the week, or just put them on the Knit and Matters page. That's what it's there for. Don't forget as well that our friends at Mary Maxim offer a 20% discount as long as you use the promo code Cheryl on anything that you buy from their online site, marymaxim.com. But you must put in promo code Cheryl at checkout to get 20% off, and that's off the highest priced item in your cart. And that's not just today, that's any time at all. Okay. As always, this episode of Knit and Matters is uploaded to our Facebook page. It's also uploaded to the YouTube channel of the same name, Knit and Matters. You can also find that on Style Matters and on the Style Matters International website. Help us to reach more knitters by liking, sharing and following, and let us know what you'd like to learn. You know, we're here for that purpose, so let me know what you would like to know. So join us next week, because we're going to start some festive projects for Christmas, which will be fun. So join us next Tuesday. In the meantime, stay well, stay knitting and stay calm, and I will see you next week. Bye for now.